Who we got in here? All right, Joe, here we go. I hope everybody's ready, and here we go. As soon as I open it up. All right, Lenin's proof of the theory of reflection. In Materialism and Imperial Criticism, Lenin offered the following arguments to back up the theory of reflection. 1. Things exist independently of our consciousness, independently of our perceptions outside of us. For it is beyond doubt that the Alzarian, a chemical substance which was newly discovered at time of writing, existed in coal tar yesterday, and is equally beyond doubt that yesterday we knew nothing of the existence of this element and received no sensations from it. Lenin is saying that the material world must exist outside of independent form from our consciousness. He cites as evidence the discovery of the chemical substance, which until recently we had no sensory perception of it, of noting that this substance must have existed long before we became aware of it through sensory observation. 2. There's definitely no difference in principle between the phenomena and the thing in itself, and there can be no such differences. The only differences is between what is known and what is not yet known. The philosophical inventions of specific boundaries between the one and the other, inventions to the effect that the thing in itself is beyond phenomenon, Kant, or that we can or must fence ourselves off by some philosophical partition from the problem of the world, which in one part or another is still unknown, but which exists outside us. Hume. All this is the sheerest nonsense, unfounded belief, trick and invention. Lenin is referencing a century-old debate about whether or not human beings are capable of having real knowledge of a thing in itself, or if we can only perceive phenomena of things, characteristic observable to our senses. The thing in itself refers to the actual material object which exists outside of our consciousness. So the question being posed is, can we really have knowledge of material objects outside of our consciousness? Or does consciousness itself act as a barrier to ever really knowing anything about material objects and the material world outside of our consciousness? Immanuel Kant argued that we can never know the true nature of the material world, writing, quote, "We indeed, rightly considering objects of sense as mere appearances, confess thereby that they are based upon a thing in itself, though we know not this thing as it is in itself, but only know its appearances, viz. The way in which our senses are affected by its unknown something." This idea that the senses could not be trusted to deliver accurate knowledge, and thus the thing in itself is essentially unknowable, was carried forward by later empiricists such as Bacon and Hume. In Langwijk van Feuerbach and the end of classical German philosophy, Marx and Engels refute this notion, arguing that practice allows us to discover truth about things in themselves. The most telling refutation of this is, of all other philosophical crochets, is practice, namely experiment and industry. If we are able to prove the correctness of our conception of the natural processes by making it ourselves, bringing it into being out of its conditions, and making it serve our own purpose into bargain, then there is an end to the Kantian Kantian an ungraspable thing in itself. Lenin explains on this argument, explaining that the phenomenon of objects which we observe with our senses do accurately reflect material objects, even though we might not know everything about these objects at once. Over time, as we learn more and more about material objects, the material world through practice and repeating observations, we more fully and accurately come to understand the thing in itself, in themselves. As he writes in Empirical Criticism and Materialism. 3. The theory of knowledge. As in every other branch of science, we must think dialectically. That is, we must not regard our knowledge as ready-made and unalterable, but must determine how knowledge emerges from ignorance, how incomplete inact knowledge becomes more complete and more inact. Where Lenin further elaborates on the dialectical natures of knowledge, we must simultaneously accept that our knowledge is never perfect and unchanging. But we must also recognize that we are capable of making our knowledge more exact and complete over time. To further defend his ideas about reflection, Lenin cited Czech philosopher Karl Kautsky's argument against Kant, that I see green, red, and white is grounded in my faculty of sight, but that green is something different from red testifies to something that lies outside of me, to real differences between the thing, the relationship and differences between the things themselves, revealed to me by the individual space and time concepts, are real relations and differences of the external world, not conditioned by the nature of my perceptive faculties. If this were really so, i.e., if Kant's doctrine of the ideality of time and space were true, we could know nothing about the world outside us, not even that it exists. Lenin followed from Marx and Engels that in order to further develop our understanding and knowledge of the material world, it was necessary to engage in practice. Engels wrote in Socialism and Utopian and Scientific, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. From the moment we use these objects according to the qualities we perceive in them, we put to an infallible test and the correctness or otherwise of our sense perception. If these perceptions have been wrong, then our estimate of the use to which an object can be turned must also be wrong. If our attempt must fail. But if we succeed in accomplishing our aim, if we find that the object does agree with our idea of it, does answer the purpose we intended it for, then that is positive proof that our perceptions of its qualities is so far agree with the reality outside ourselves. Notice that Engels is careful to use the words so far. Its qualities so far agree with reality outside ourselves. Engels does not argue that human understanding of the material world is fallible. Mistakes are often made, but over time, as such mistakes are discovered and our understanding improves, our knowledge of the material world develops. This is only possible if the phenomenon of objects which we observe, the reflection within our consciousness, do actually and accurately represent material reality. Lenin elaborated on this necessity to constantly update and improve dialectical materialist philosophies as new information and knowledge became available. Engels, for instance, assimilated to him new terms, energy and began to employ it in 1885, preface to the second edition of Anti-Düring. And in 1888, Ludwig von Feuerbach but to employ it equally with the concepts of force and motion, and along with them, Engels was able to enrich his materialism by adopting a new terminology. Real quick, we're doing all right? Hope we're doing all right. Good. Who else is in here? Okay. All right. Engels provides further elaboration on how practical experience and mastery of the material of the material world refutes the notion that it is impossible to have real knowledge of the material world in Ludwig von Feuerbach and the end of classical German philosophy. The most telling refutation of this, as of all other philosophical fancies, is practice, visa, experiment, and industry. If we are able to prove the correctness of our conception of the natural processes by making it ourselves, bringing it into being out of its condition, and using it for our own purposes, in the bargain, then there is an end to the Kantian incomprehensible or ungraspable the chemical substances produce in the bodies and plants and animals remain such things in themselves until organic chemistry began to produce them one after another. Thereupon the thing in itself became a thing for us, as for instance Alzarian in dye, which was originally plant-based, which we no longer trouble to grow in the field, but produce much more cheaply and simply from coal tar. So dialectical materialism holds that there is a material world external from our consciousness. That consciousness thoughts are reflections of this material world, that we can have real knowledge of the material world through sensory observation, and that our knowledge and understanding of the material world is best advanced through practice in the material world. Social sources of consciousness. There are many factors that constitute the social sources of consciousness. The most basic and direct factors are labor and language. Labor is the process by which humans interact with the natural world in order to make products for our needs of existing and developing. Labor is also a process that changes the human body structure, muscles developing through exercises. In Dialectics of Nature, Engels describes the dialectical relationship between labor and human development. Labor is the source of all wealth, the political economists assert, and it really is the source, next to nature, which supplies it with the materials that it converts into wealth. But it is even infinitely more than this. It is the prime basic conditions for all human existence, and this too, such an existence that in the sense we have to say that labor creates man himself. Before the first flint could be fashioned into a knife by human hands, a period of time probably elapsed, in comparison with which the historical period known to us appears insignificant. But this decisive step had been taken. The hand had become free and could thenceforth attain even greater dexterity. The greater flexibility thus acquired was inherited and increased from generation to generation. Thus the hand is not only an organ of labor, it is also the product of labor. Only by labor, by adaptation to every new operation through the inheritance of muscles, ligaments, and over longer periods of time, bones that have undergone special development and even renewed employment of this inherited fitness. In new fitness, in new, more and more complicated operations have given the human hand the high degree of perfection required to conjure into being the picture of the Raphael, the statue of the Thorwaldsen, the music of the Paganini. But the hand did not exist alone. It was only one member of the integral, highly complex organism. And what benefited the hand benefit also the whole body it served. Labor also allows us to discover attributes, structures, motion laws, etc. of the natural world via observable phenomenon. We discover truth about the natural world through labor, through physical practice in the material world. All these phenomena, through our human senses, impact our human brains. And through brain activity, knowledge and consciousness of the objective world are formed and developed. Language is a system of material signals that carries information with cognitive content. Without language, consciousness could not exist and developed. The birth of language goes hand in hand with labor. From the beginning, labor was social. The relationship between people who perform labor processes required them to have means of communicate and exchange thoughts. This requirement caused language to arise and develop along with the working processes. With language, humans not only communicated, but also summarized reality and conveyed experiences and thoughts from generation to generation. From Dialecticus of Nature. Here we go. Real quick. Hope everybody's doing all right. All right. Sweet, sweet. Who's in the thing? It has already been noted that our Semian ancestors were gregarious. It is obviously impossible to seek the derivation. What's that word? Derivation. Let me see. Hold on, everybody.
From Dialectics of Nature. It has already been noted that our simian ancestors were gregarious. It is obviously impossible to seek the derivation of man.
The derivation of man, yes. The most social of all animals, from non-gregarious immediate ancestors. Mastery over nature began with the development of the hand, with labor, and widened man's horizon and every new advance. He has continually discovered new, hitherto unknown properties in natural objects. On the other hand, the development of labor necessarily helped to bring the members of society closer together by increasing cases of mutual support and joint activities, and by making clear the advantage of this joint activity to each other, to each individual. In short, men in the making arrived at the point where they had something to say to each other. Necessity created the organ, and developed larynx of the ape was slowly but surely transformed by modulation to produce constantly more developed modulation, and the organs of the mouth gradually learned to pronounce one articulate sound after another. Comparison with animals proves that this explanation of the organ of language from and in the process of labor is the only correct one. The little that even the most highly developed animal needs to communicate to each other does not require articulate speech. It is natural in its natural state. No animals feel handicapped by its inability to speak or to understand human speech. It is quite different when it has been tamed by man. The dog and the horse, by association with man, have developed such a good ear for articulate speech that they easily learn to understand any language within their range of concept. Moreover, they have acquired the capacity for feeling such an affection for man, gratitude, etc., which were previously foreign to them. Anyone who has had much to do with such animals will hardly be able to escape the convictions that in many cases they now feel their inability to speak as a defect, although unfortunately it is one that can no longer be remedied because their vocal organs are too specialized in a definite direction. However, where vocal organs exist within certain limits, even this inability disappears. The bronchial or buccal, buccal organs of birds are as different from those of man as they can be, yet birds are the only animals that can learn to speak. And it is the bird with the most hideous voice, the parrot, that speaks best of all. Let no one object that the parrot does not understand what it says. It is true that for the sheer pleasure of talking and associating with human beings, the parrot will chatter for hours at stretch, continually repeating its whole vocabulary. But within the limits of its range and concepts, it can also learn to understand what it is saying. Teach a parrot swear words in such a way that it gets an idea of their meaning. One of the greatest amusements of sailors returning from the tropics, tease it, and you will soon discover that it knows how to use its swear words just as correctly as a Berlin costermonger. No idea what that is. The same is true of begging for tidbits. First labor, after it, and then with its speech. These were the two most essentially stimuli under the influence of which the brain of the ape gradually changed into that of man, which, for all its similarities, is far larger and more perfect, and in inevitability accompanied by a corresponding refinement of the organ of hearing. So the development of the brain was as a whole is accompanied by the refinement of, and with the development of the brain went the development of its most immediate instruments, the senses, just as the gradual development of speech is all the senses. The eagle sees much further than man, but the human eye discerns considerably more in things that does the eye of the eagle. The dog has a far keener sense of smell than men, but it does not distinguish 100th part of the odors that for man are definite signs denoting different things, and the sense of touch, which the ape hardly possesses in its crudest initial form, has been developed only side by side with the development of human hand itself through the medium of labor. So, the most basic, direct, and important source that decides the birth and development of language is labor. Language appears later than labor, but always goes with labor. Language and labor were the two main stimulations affecting the brain of the primates, which evolved into humans, slowly changing their brains into human brains and transforming animal psychology into human consciousness. Are you there, Joe? Because we have a picture. There it is. All right, let's bring this picture up. All right, so precision grips, power squeeze grips, combination of the thumb and the fifth digit are critical to controlling and manipulating objects within one hand during precision and power squeeze grips used during tool making and tool uses. The fifth digit stabilizes hammerstone and core during tool making. FCU, I think that's, I don't know what FCU is. I don't know, maybe we'll show it. FCUs, FDM, and ADM, active and dominant and non-dominant hands during tool making. And then over here, it has the FPL and the EPB active. The FPL not strongly active, OP first DI. I have no idea. Sorry, buddy. And the FPA, the FPB active just before striking a dominant hand. Most muscles of thumb have larger moment arms than a pan OP or AP muscle have large sectional areas and potential torque. The fifth digit anchors hands during power squeeze grips. The FPB and independent FPL more frequently in humans than other primates. Sorry, everybody. I had no idea what those were for. Different muscles in the hands. Okay, thank you. This diagram is based on work from an article titled "The Evidence in Hands: Recent Discoveries and Earlier Evolution of Human Manual Manipulation." Modern research has discovered strong evidence that the human hand evolved along with tools used in the line with angles analysis in dialectics of nature. All right. Stone tool. Okay. Here we go. It is also worth noted that just as human consciousness derived from labor and language and social activity, so too did society itself arise from language and labor, as Engels explains in Dialectics of Nature. The reaction of labor and speech. Ooh, sorry. I forgot. My bad. The reaction of labor and speech of the development of the brain and its attendant senses, of the increasing clarity of consciousness, power of abstraction, and of conclusion, gave both labor and speech a ever newer impulse to further development. This development did not reach its conclusion when man finally became distinct from the ape, but on the whole made further powerful progress, its degree and direction varying among different peoples at different times, and here and there even being interpreted by local and temporary regression. This further development has been strongly urged forward on the one hand and guided along more definite directions on the other by a new element which came into play with the appearance of a fully fledged man, namely society. In other words, these factors of human physical nature and human society have a dialectical relationship with one another. Elements of human nature in particular labor and language led to the development of human society, which in turn played a key role in the development of human language and labor. There's another picture. Hold on. Here we go. So here we go. Language, labor, human nature, human society. Human language and human labor mutually develop one another through a dialectical process of developed human nature. Simultaneously, human nature and human society mutually develops one another through a dialectical process. Thank you. Oh, it is kind of hot. All right. Elements of human nature and the practical labor and language led to the development of human society, which in turn played a key role in the development of human language and labor. B, natural and structure of consciousness. Nature. A nature and structure of consciousness. Nature and consciousness. Consciousness is a dynamic and creative reflection. Oh, let me take off his shirt. Hold on a second. I'm getting hot. Thought it'd be cold. Thank you, Two Spirit, for reposting. I appreciate that. I hope you're okay. Hope you're feeling better at least. Consciousness is a dynamic and creative reflection of the objective world in human brains. It is the subjective image of the objective worlds. The dynamic and creative nature of reflection is expressed in human physiological activities. When we receive, select, process, and save data in our brains, within the human brain, we are able to collect data from the internal, external material world. Based on this information, our brain is capable of creating new information, and we are able to analyze, interpret, and understand all this information collectively within our consciousness. The dynamic of creative nature of reflection is also expressed in several human processes: the creation of ideas, hypotheses, stories, etc., the ability to summarize nature and to comprehend the objective laws of nature, the ability to construct models of ideas, the systems of knowledge to guide our activities. Consciousness is a subjective image of the objective world. Consciousness is defined by the objective world in both content and form. However, consciousness does not perfectly reflect the objective world. That's why we need all of us together. That's why it's a collective effort. And it modifies information through the subjective lens, thoughts, feelings, aspirations, experience, knowledge, needs, etc. of humans. According to Marx and Engels, ideas are simply sublimates, transformation of the human brain's material life processes, which is empirically viable, verifiable, and bound to material premises. In the German ideology, Marx and Engels refers to ideas somewhat poetically as, quote, the phantoms forms of the human brain, and explains that ideas arise directly from material human life processes. Lenin makes it very clear in Materialism and Imperial Criticism that consciousness is not a mirror image or exact reproduction of reality, quoting Engels. The great basic question of all philosophy, Engels says, especially of modern philosophy, is that concerning the relation of thinking and being, of spirit and nature, having divided the philosophers into two great camps. On this basic question, Engels shows that there is yet another side to this basic philosophical question, viz. In that relation, do our thoughts about the world surrounding us stand to this world itself? Is our thinking capable of the cognition of the real world? Are we able, in our ideas and notions of the real world, to produce a correct reflection of reality? The overwhelming majority of philosophers give an affirmative answer to this question, says Engels, including under this head not only all materialists, but also the most consistent idealist. Of extra importance is Lenin's footnotes to the above passage regarding that he purports to be Viktor Chernov's mistranslation of Engels. Friedrich Engels, Ludwig Feuerbach, etc. 4th edition, German edition, S15, Russian translation, Geneva edition, 1905. Mr. V. Chernov translated the word, oh my gosh, I don't know that. spaghettably, I think that's in German, literally a mere reflection, accused Plekhanov of presenting the theory of angles in a very weakened form by speaking in Russian simply of a reflection instead of a mere reflection. This is mere Kverling. I don't know. This is another German word, which is mere reflection in German, is also used simply in the sense of reflection image. So they're just trying to go over the German word, which is like mere reflection and then reflection image. So yeah, here Lenin infers and clarifies Engels' idea that consciousness is not a perfect exact duplicate of reality, not a quote-unquote mere image. This, however, does not contradict the fact that we can obtain real knowledge of the real world in our consciousness, and that this knowledge improves over time through practice and observation. Indeed, Lenin's passage on practice, cited first in this annotation, directly follows the above passage in Materialism and Imperial Criticism. Consciousness is a social phenomenon and has a social nature. Consciousness arose from real life activities. Consciousness is always ruled by natural law and by social law. Natural law includes the laws of physics, chemistry, and other natural phenomena which govern the material world. Consciousness itself had never violated natural law as it arises from the natural processes of the natural world. Social law includes the objective and universal relationship between social phenomenon and social processes. Human society was created through labor, and this labor was performed in very specific material relations between humans and the natural world. Note, social law is a key concept in historical materialism, which is the topic of part 2 of the textbook, which we'll read next after this volume part. In the contribution of the critique of the political economy, Marx explains how social existence and social laws govern the consciousness of individuals. In the social production of their existence, men inevitably enter into definite relations which are independent of their will, namely relations of production, appropriate to a given stage of development of their material forces of production. The totality of these relations of production constitutes the economic structure of society, the real foundation on which arises a legal and political superstructure, and to which corresponds definite forms of social consciousness. A mode of production of material life conditions the general process of social, political, and intellectual life. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness. Consciousness is determined by social communication needs of human beings as well as material conditions of reality. The term material conditions refers to the external environment which humans inhabit. Material conditions include the natural environment, the means of production, and the economic base of human society. The other objective externalities and systems which affect human life and society. Note that material conditions don't refer to physical matter alone, but also include objective social relations and phenomenon. In a contribution to the critique of the political economy, Marx argues that neither legal relations nor political forms could be comprehended rather by themselves or on the basis of a so-called general development of the human mind, but on the contrary, they originate in the material conditions of life. Consciousness is dynamic in nature, constantly learning and changing flexibly. Consciousness guides humans to transform the material world to suit our needs. Consciousness and material conditions have a dialectical relationship with one another, just as the base of society and the superstructure have a dialectical relationship with one another. Consciousness arises from material conditions through conscious activities, can affect material conditions, as Marx explains in Capital One. Here he goes. Here's what he's going to explain. Just looking back a little bit. Sweet. At the end of every labor process, we get a result that already exists in the imagination of the laborer at its commencement. He not only affects a change of form in the material on which he works, but he also realizes a purpose of his own that gives the law to his modus operandi, and to which he must subordinate his will. And this subordination is no mere momentary act. Besides, the exertion of the bodily organs and the process demands that during the whole operation, the workman's will be steadily in cognizance with his purpose. In the contribution of the critique of political economy, Marx explains how the development of material conditions eventually leads to conscious activity, which will in turn lead to changes in society. In a certain stage of development, the material productive forces of society come into conflict with the existing relations of production, or is merely expresses the same thing in legal terms, with the property relations within the framework of which they have operated hitherto. And from forms of development of the productive forces, these relations turn into their fetters. They begin an era of social revolution. The changes in the economic foundation lead sooner or later to the transformation of the whole immense superstructure. As Marx further explains, material conditions must first be met before such revolutionary social change can be made through conscious activity. No social order is ever destroyed before all the productive forces for which it is sufficient have been developed, and new superior relations of production never replace older ones before the material conditions for their existence have matured within the framework of the old society. Thank you. Bro, debate me. Structures of consciousness. Consciousness has a very complicated structure, including many factors which have strong relationships with each other. The most basic factors are knowledge, sentiment, and willpower. This just goes to prove that we need to collectivize with one another, because in order to engage with the reality of the world, we need to be collective with one another. As this concept of reflection, the analysis of the structure of consciousness, which follows is rooted in ideas first proposed by Marx and Engels and Lenin, and later developed through the works of various Soviet psychologists, philosophers, and scientists, including Ivan Pavlov, Todor Pavlov, Alleginsky, Leonid Yavosky, Valentin Voloshinov, and others, and is used as a basis for scientific inquiry and development up to this day. According to Where is Marx in the World and Thought of Volosky by Lucien Sieves, 2018. Much of this work, such as the groundbreaking work of Lev Yavosky, has been heavily de-Marxized, stripping of all aspects of Marxism and, by extension, dialectical materialism in translation to English. Knowledge constitutes the understanding of human beings and is the result of a cognitive process Knowledge is the recreated image of perceived objects, which takes the form of language. Knowledge is the mode of existence of consciousness and the condition of consciousness to develop. Marx and Engels discussed the relationship between language and consciousness extensively in the German ideology, explaining that language and the form of knowledge which exists in human consciousness involve dialectically with and through social activities, and that consciousness also developed along with and through the material process that give rise to speech. From the start, the spirit is afflicted with the curse of being burdened with matter, which here makes its appearance in the form of agitated layers of air, sounds, and in short, of language. Language is as old as consciousness. Language is practical consciousness that exists also for other men. And for that reason alone, it really exists for me personally. As well, language, like consciousness, only arises from the necessity of intercourse with other men. So, language, physical speech, organs in human societies all developed in dialectic relations with one another, since language is a form of knowledge in human consciousness. This means that knowledge arose directly from these dialectical processes. Consciousness is, therefore, from the very beginning, a social product and remains so as long as men exist at all. Consciousness is at first, of course, merely consciousness concerning the immediate senses, environment, and consciousness of the limited connections with other persons and things outside the individual who is growing self-conscious. The fact that knowledge has a language form in human consciousness is also important to understand, because it shows that consciousness arose dialectically as and through social activity, and indeed, language and social activity gave rise to consciousness as a replacement for animal instinct in our relations with nature. Man's consciousness is a necessity of associating with the individuals around him, is the beginning of the consciousness that he is living in society at all. The beginning is as animal as social life itself at this stage. It is mere herd consciousness. And at this point, man is only distinguished from sheep by the fact that with his consciousness takes the place of instinct, or that his instinct is a conscious one. And as language and social activity dialectically developed through one another, human society became complex, even to give rise to human societies and human economies. This sheep, like, or tribal consciousness receives its further development and extension through increased productivity and increase of needs, and what is fundamental to both of these, the increase of population. With these, their developments and the division of labor. Knowledge can be separated into two broad categories: knowledge of nature and knowledge of human society. Which of these categories of knowledge reflect its corresponding entities in the external world? And here we got a picture. Thank you, Joe. All right, nature, human society. Knowledge of nature reflects nature. Knowledge of human society reflects human society. Each category of knowledge reflects a corresponding entity that the external world, in the external world. Thank you, Joe. It's also important to note, let me get this up. It is also important to note that human society and nature have a dialectical relationship with each other and mutually impact one another. And by extension, knowledge of nature and knowledge of human society also dialectically influence one another. So this category is knowledge are not isolated from one another, but rather dynamically shaped and influence each other each other consciously through time. Based on levels of cognitive development, we can also classify knowledge into categories of daily life knowledge, scientific knowledge, experience knowledge, and theory knowledge, emotional knowledge, and rational knowledge. Here comes another picture. The following information is form of Marxist-Leninist textbooks of students who specialize in Marxist-Leninism, released by the Vietnamese Ministry of Education and Training. I think they're just letting you know what these are. All right, daily life and scientific knowledge. Knowledge of nature, dialectical relationship with knowledge of human society. Daily life knowledge of nature, dialectical relationship, daily life knowledge of human society. Do you see it? Scientific knowledge of nature, dialectical relationship, scientific knowledge of human society. Less developed, more developed. Do you see? Daily life knowledge is the knowledge we acquire with our daily tasks. From our interactions with nature and human society, we cultivate life, experience, and our understanding of every aspect of our daily lives in relations to human society and nature. Scientific knowledge arises from daily life knowledge. As our daily lives become more complex, we develop a need to understand the material world and human society more deeply and comprehensively. Scientific knowledge is thus a developed system of knowledge of nature and human society. Scientific knowledge can be tested and can be applied to human life and activity in useful ways. Then we have another picture. Experience of the theory of knowledge, knowledge of nature, dialectical relation, knowledge, and so they're going right back over. Experience of knowledge of nature, experience of knowledge of human society. So nature and human society have a dialectical relationship with one another. One's less and one's more developed. The dialectical relationship of human society So experienced knowledge is cultivated from direct observation of nature and human society. This kind of knowledge is extremely diverse. Theory knowledge arises from experienced knowledge. Theory knowledge is composed of abstract generalizations of experienced knowledge. Theory knowledge is more profound, accurate, and systematically organized than experienced knowledge, and gives us an understanding of the laws and dynamics of nature and human society. Another picture. We're coming with the pictures, everybody. Emotional and rational knowledge. Knowledge of nature. It's the same thing. Emotional knowledge of nature, emotional knowledge of human society. Rational knowledge of nature, rational knowledge of human society. When rational knowledge, it looks like it becomes more developed. Emotional knowledge is the earlier stage of cognitive processes. Emotional knowledge comes directly to us from our human senses. We obtain emotional knowledge when we use our human senses to directly learn things about nature and human society. Emotional knowledge is usually manifested as immediate cognitive responses, such as pleasure, pain, and other such impulses. Rational knowledge arises from emotional knowledge. It is a higher stage of cognitive processes, involves abstract thought and generalization of emotional knowledge. Rational knowledge is usually manifested in definitions, conjectures, judgment, etc. Sentiment is the resonant manifestation of human emotions and feelings in our relationship. Sentiment is a special form of reality reflection. Whenever reality impacts human beings, we feel specific sensations and emotional reactions to those impacts. Over time, these specific sensations and emotion combine a dialectical development into generalized human feelings, and we call this generalized feeling sediment. Sediment expresses the development in every aspect of human life. It is a factor that improves and promotes cognitive and practical activities. As Marx explains in Economic and Philosophic Manuscripts of 1844, man, quote, man as an object, sensuous being, is therefore a suffering being, and because he feels that he suffers, a passionate being. Passion is an essential power of man's energetically bent on its object. Marx further elaborates that sentimental motion is essential to human nature. The domination of the objective essence within me, the sensuous eruption of my essentially active is emotions, which thereby becomes an activity of my nature. Depending on the subject that are perceived, as well as our human emotions about them, sentiments can be manifested in many different forms, such as moral emotions, aesthetic emotions, religious emotions. All right, hold on a second, just making sure. All right. Moral emotions is the basic manifestations of morals, consciousness at the emotional level. For example, when we see people helping other people, we have a positive emotional response. When we see people harming other people, we have a negative emotional response. Aesthetic emotions refer to the resonant feelings which arise from our interactions with beauty, sadness, comedy, etc. in life and in art. For example, when humans encounter beauty, we feel positive emotional response. When humans encounter ugliness, we feel negative emotional response. When we witness pain, we feel sympathetic feelings of pain and a desire to help. When we witness comedy, we feel humorous emotions ourselves. Religious emotions is the human belief in supernatural and spiritual forces which can't be tested or proved through material practice or observation. However, belief in these forces can give human beings emotional responses such as hope, love, etc. These are just a few illustrative examples. There are many other ways in which human emotion and sentiment can manifest. Willpower is the manifestation of one's own strength, used to overcome obstacles in the process of achieving goals. Willpower is a dynamic aspect of consciousness, a manifestation of human consciousness in the material world. An unnamed poem by Ho Chi Minh, written in 1950 for the revolutionary youth pioneers, addressed the phenomenon of willpower. Nothing in this world must be difficult. The only thing that we should fear is having a wavering heart. We can dig up mountains and fill the sea once we've willfully made a firm decision. Today, this poem serves as lyrics for the anthem of the Ho Chi Minh Communist Youth Union, formerly the Revolutionary Youth Pioneers. Willpower arises from humans' self-awareness and awareness of the purpose of our actions. Through this awareness and through willpower, we are able to struggle against ourselves and externalities to successfully achieve our goals. We are considered willpower to be the power of conscious human activity. Willpower controls and regulates human behaviors in order to allow humans to move towards our goal voluntarily. Willpower also allows humans to exercise self-restraint and self-control, to be assertive in our actions according to our views and beliefs. We're doing good. We're doing good. Hopefully everybody's doing all right. In Capital Volume 1, Marx explains how willpower uniquely allows humans to consciously change our own material conditions to suit our needs according to preconceived plans. Labor is, in the first place, a process in which both man and nature participates, in which man of his own accord regulates and controls the material reaction between himself and nature. He imposes himself to nature as one of her own forces, setting in motion arms and legs, heads and hands, the natural forces of his body, in order to appropriate nature production in a form adapted to his own wants. But thus acting on the external world and changing it, he at the same time changes his own nature. He develops his slumbering powers and compels them to act in obedience with his sway. We are not now dealing with those primitive instructive forms of labor that reminds us of mere animals, and immeasurable intervals of time separates the state of things in which a man brings his labor power to market for sale as a commodity, from that state in which human labor was still in its first instructive stage. We presuppose labor in a form that stamps it as exclusively human. A spider conducts operations that resemble those of a weaver, and a bee puts to shame many an architect and the construction of her cells. But what distinguishes the worst architect from the best of bees is this, that the architect raises his structures in imagination before he erects it in reality. At the end of every labor process, we get the result that already exists in the imagination of the laborer. It is commencement. He not only affects a change of form in the material on which he works, but he also realizes a purpose of his own that gives the law to his modus operandi, and to which he must subordinate his will. And this subordination is no mere monetary act. Besides the exertion of the bodily organs, the process demands that during the whole operation, the workman's will be steadily in cognizance with his purpose. This means close attention. The less he is attracted by the nature of the work and the mode in which it is to carried on, and the less, therefore, he enjoys it as something which gives play to his bodily and mental powers, and more close his attention is forced to be. The true value of willpower is not only manifested in strength or weaknesses, but it also expresses in the content and meaning of the goals that we try to achieve through our willpower. Lenin believed that willpower is not of the factors that will create revolutionary careers for millions of people in the fierce class struggle to liberate ourselves and mankind. In left-wing communism, it explains how revolutions are born from a collective willpower of thousands of people. History as a whole, and the history of revolution is always richer in content, more varied, more multiform, more lively and ingenious than is imagined by even the best parties. The most class-conscious vanguards of the most advanced classes. This can readily be understood because even the finest of vanguards express class consciousness, will, passion, and imagination of tens of thousands, whereas at moments of great upsurge and the exertion of all human capacities, revolution are made by the class consciousness, will, passion, and imaginations of tens of millions, spurred on by the most accurate struggle of classes. Two very important practical conclusions follow from this. First, that in order to accomplish this task, the revolutionary class must be able to master all forms or aspects of social activity, without exception, completing after the capture of political power, sometimes at great risk and with very great danger. What it did not complete before the capture of power. Second, that the revolutionary class must be prepared for the most rampant and burlesque replacement of one form by another. So he's talking about replacing the state and replacing all of these factors, knowledge, sentiment, and willpower, which together create consciousness, have dialectical relationship with each other. Of these factors, knowledge is the most important because it is the mode of existence and consciousness, and also of consciousness, and also the factor which guides the development of all the other factors, and it also determines how the other factors manifest. Hold on a second. Where are we at? Oh, we're good. Let me see something here real quick. Let me look ahead real quick. Plenty of stopping points, it looks like. Okay, I got some stopping points. 112. 112, right? We were done with 112. Right? We were done with 112. Yep. Okay, good. All right. However, it is important to remember that the relationship between matter and consciousness is dialectical. All right, thank you. Number 3, the relationship between matter and consciousness. The relationship between matter and consciousness is dialectical. In this relationship, matter comes first, and matter is the source of consciousness. It decides consciousness. However, consciousness is not totally passive. It can impact back to matter through practical activities in human beings. Engels explains in Dialectics of Nature that matter evolves out of itself and thinks itself the thinking human brain, which means that matter must necessarily come prior to consciousness. As Marx explains in Capital One, matter determines conscious activity. The production of ideas, of conceptions, of consciousness is at first directly interwoven with the material activity and the material intercourse of men and the language of real life. Conceiving, thinking, mental intercourse of men appear at this stage as the direct influx of their material behavior. The same applies to mental production as expressed in the language of politics, laws, morality, religion, metaphysics, etc. of a people. Men are producers of their conceptions, ideas, etc. Real active men, as they are conditioned by a definite development of their productive forces and of the intercourse correspond to these up to its furthest forms. Consciousness can never be anything else than conscious existence, and the existence of man is their actual life process. If in all ideology, men and their circumstances appear upside down, as in a camera obscura, this phenomenon arises just as much from their historical life process as the inversion of objects on the retina does from their physical life processes. However, I'm just looking back. As you can see, we don't have a lot of people. However, it's important to remember that the relationship between matter and consciousness is dialectical, and that consciousness activity through the combination of will, power, and labor can also impact the material world. Social change arises through the combined willpower of many human beings. The role of matter and consciousness. Dialectical materialism affirms that matter is first existence and that consciousness comes after. Matter is the source of consciousness. It decides consciousness. We know that matter determines consciousness because consciousness is the product of the high level structures, matter such as the human brain. Consciousness itself can only exist after the development of the material structure of the human brain. Humans are the result of millions of years of development of the material world. We are therefore products of the material world. This conclusion has been firmly established through the development of natural science, which has given us great insight into the long history of the earth and of the evolution of living organisms, including human beings. All this scientific evidence stands as the basis for the viewpoint of matter comes first, consciousness comes second. We have already discussed the factors which constitute the natural and social sources of consciousness. Human brains, impacts of the material world on human brains that causes reflection, labor, language. All of these factors also assert that matter is the origins of consciousness. We getting the theme? Another picture. All right. So what we have here is material basis of consciousness. We have the brain. Number one, A, the material structure of the human brain. That is A. B, impacts from the material world cause reflections in human consciousness. And then C, human labor. Human labor, physical processes which dialectically develop consciousness. D, human speech, physical process which dialectically develops consciousness. And then E, evolution of human brains and consciousness through material processes of the material world. Thank you. Thank you. Consciousness is composed of reflections and subjective images of the material world. Therefore, the content of consciousness is decided by matter. The development of consciousness is determined by natural laws and by social laws, as well as the material environment which we inhabit. All these factors which determine consciousness are material in nature. Therefore, matter determines not only the content, but also the development of consciousness. B, the role of consciousness in matter. The relation to matter, consciousness can impact matter through human activity. When we discuss consciousness, we are discussing human consciousness. So when we talk about the role of consciousness, we are talking about the role of human beings. Consciousness in and of itself cannot directly change anything in reality. And in order to change reality, humans have to implement material activities. However, consciousness controls every human activity. So even though consciousness does not directly create or change the material world, it equips humans with knowledge about objective reality. And based on that foundation of knowledge, humans are able to identify goals, set directions, develop plans, select methods, solutions, tools, and means of achieving our goals. So, consciousness manifests its ability to impact matter through human activity. The impact of consciousness on matter can have positive and negative results. Positive and negative in this context are subjective and relative terms, which simply denote moving towards a goal and moving away from a goal based on specific perspectives. From a perspective of revolutionary communism, positive can be taken as moving towards the end goal of the liberation of the working class from capitalist oppression and the construction of a stateless, classless society. Likewise, negative can be taken as moving away from the goal. Humans have the ability to overcome all challenges in the process of achieving our goals and improving our world, so long as our conscious activity meet the following criteria. We must perceive reality accurately. We must properly apply scientific knowledge, revolutionary sentiments, and direct willpower. We must avoid contradicting objective laws of nature and society. We must avoid contradicting. Okay. Successfully achieve our goals in improving the world in this matter constitutes a positive outcome of human consciousness. On the contrary, if human consciousness wrongly reflects objective reality, nature, and laws, then right from the beginning, our actions will have negative results, which will do harm to ourselves and our society. Therefore, by directing the activities of humans, consciousness can determine whether the results of human activity are beneficial or harmful. Our consciousness thus determines whether our activities will succeed or fail, and whether our efforts will be effective or ineffective. By studying the matter, origin, and nature of consciousness, as well as the relationship between matter and consciousness, we can see that matter is the source of consciousness. Matter determines the content and creative capacity of consciousness. Matter is a prerequisite to form consciousness. Consciousness only has the ability to impact matter, and this impact is indirect because it has to be done through human material activities within material reality. And here we have another picture, everybody. It's the same thing, but we're going to go through it anyways. All right. Determines, impacts matter. Determines consciousness. Consciousness impacts matter. Matter determines consciousness, while consciousness impacts directly through human activity. Thank you, Joe. You're the best. Where we at? All right, 46. The strength with which consciousness can impact the material world depends on the accuracy of reflection of the material world in consciousness, the strength of willpower which transmits consciousness to human activity, the degree of organization in social activity, material conditions in which human activity occurs, the importance of organization in determining the outcomes of human social activity is one of the most important concepts of Marxist-Leninism and is discussed frequently by Marx, Engels, and Lenin, and nearly every other important communist revolutionary in history. Marx explains the connection between social organization and conscious human activity in Capital One. All right, what are we doing? Let me see here. And look ahead again. Actually, this might be a good stopping point. What do you think, Joe?
Sounds good to me.
All right, let's stop here. Hold on a second. What page did I... Okay, we're stopping at page 116. Number 4. The meanings and the methodology. Let me do it at my bookmark. People are welcome to join. If they have questions or want to talk about it, please put in your request and come up. Let's have a conversation, as Two Spirit would say. Let's have a conversation. Where is it? Where do we got? Doodley's not here, I guess.
I have some notes. Starting with
Doodley is here.
The theory of reflection, or should I go before that?
Let's see if Dooley will come up. Okay, go ahead. No, start from where... Oh, there they are. We'll keep it the same theme. We'll have you do your notes, and then whatever Doodley wants to say next.
Okay. Well, let me get started. At first, Lenin says the material world must exist outside of and independent from our consciousness. He cites as evidence the discovery of a chemical substance which until recently we had no sensory perception of, noting that the substance must have existed long before we became aware of it through sensory observation. Then, Lenin explained that the phenomena of objects which we observe with our senses do accurately reflect material objects, even though we might not know everything about these objects at once. Then, Lenin further elaborates on the dialectical nature of knowledge. We must simultaneously accept that our knowledge is never perfect and unchanging, but we must also recognize that we are capable of making our knowledge more exact and complete over time. Lenin followed from Marx and Engels that, in order to further develop our understanding and knowledge of the material world, it was necessary to engage in practice. And then, just for fun, The proof of the pudding is in the eating. Engels does not argue that human understanding of the material world is infallible. Mistakes are often made, but over time, as such mistakes are discovered and our understanding improves, our knowledge of the material world develops. This is only possible if the phenomena of objects which we observe, the reflections within our consciousness, do accurately and actually represent material reality. So dialectical materialism holds that there is a material world external from our consciousness, that conscious thoughts are reflections of this material world, that we can have real knowledge of the material world through sensory observation, and that our knowledge and understanding of the material world is best advanced through practice in the material world. And then labor is the process by which humans interact with the natural world in order to make products for our needs of existing and developing. Labor is also the process that changes the human body's structure. Labor is the source of all wealth, but it is infinitely more than this. It is the prime basic condition for all human existence, and this to such an extent that, in a sense, we have to say that labor created man himself. Labor also allows us to discover the attributes, structures, motion laws, etc. of the natural world via observable phenomenon. We discover truth about the natural world through labor, through physical practice in the material world. And language is a system of material signals that carry information with cognitive content. Without language, consciousness could not exist and develop. And then my next note was, so the most basic, direct, and important source that decides the birth and development of language is labor. Language appeared later than labor, but always goes with labor. Language and labor were the two main stimulations affecting the brains of the primates, which evolved into humans, slowly changing their brains into human brains and transforming animal physiology into human consciousness. It is also worth noting that just as human consciousness derived from labor and language and social activity, so too did society itself arise from language and labor. And these factors of humans' physical nature and human society have a dialectical relationship with one another. Elements of human nature, in particular labor and language, led to the development of human society, which in turn played a key role in the development of human language and labor. Elements of human nature, in particular labor and language, led to the development of human society, which in turn played a key role in the development of human language and labor. Okay, consciousness is the dynamic and creative reflection of the objective world in human brains. It is the subjective image of the objective world. The dynamic and creative nature of reflection is expressed in human psychophysiological activities when we receive, select, process, and save data in our brains. Within the human brain, we are able to collect data from the external material world. Based on this information, our brain is capable of creating new information, and we are able to analyze, interpret, and understand all of this information collectively within our consciousness. Consciousness is a subjective image of the objective world. Consciousness is defined by the objective world in both content and form. Consciousness is a social phenomenon and has a social nature. Consciousness arose from real-life activities. Consciousness is always ruled by natural law and by social law. Natural law includes the law of physics, chemistry, and other natural phenomenon which govern the material world. Consciousness itself can never violate natural law as it arises from the natural processes of the natural world. Social law includes the objective and universal relationships between social phenomena and social processes. Human society was created through labor, and this labor was performed in a very specific material relations between humans and the natural world. Consciousness is determined by the social communication needs of human beings as well as the material conditions of reality. The term material conditions refers to the external environment which humans inhabit. Material conditions include the natural environment, the means of production, and the economic base of human society, and other objective externalities and systems which affect human life and society. Consciousness is dynamic in nature, constantly learning and changing flexibly. Consciousness guides humans to transform the material world to suit our human needs. Consciousness and material conditions have a dialectical relationship with one another, just as the base of society and the superstructure have a dialectical relationship with one another. Consciousness arises from material conditions through conscious activity and can affect material conditions. Consciousness has a very complicated structure, including many factors which have strong relationships with each other. The most basic factors are knowledge, sentiment, and willpower. Knowledge constitutes the understanding of human beings and is the result of the cognitive process. Knowledge is the recreated image of perceived objects which takes the form of language. Knowledge is the mode of existence of consciousness and the conditions for consciousness to develop. The fact that knowledge has a language form in human consciousness is also important to understand, because it shows that consciousness arose dialectically as and through social activity, and indeed, language and social activity give rise to consciousness as a replacement for animal instinct and our relations with nature. Knowledge can be separated into two broad categories: knowledge of nature and knowledge of human society. Each of these categories of knowledge reflects its corresponding entity into the external world. It's also important to note that human society and nature have a dialectical relationship with each other and mutually impact one another. And by extension, knowledge of nature and knowledge of human society also dialectically influence one another. Based on levels of cognitive development, we can also classify knowledge into categories of daily life knowledge and scientific knowledge, experience knowledge and theory knowledge, emotional knowledge and rational knowledge. Daily life knowledge is the knowledge we acquire in our daily lives to deal with our daily tasks. Scientific knowledge arises from daily life knowledge. As our daily lives become more complex, we develop a need to understand the material world and human society more deeply and comprehensively. Scientific knowledge is thus a developed system of knowledge of nature and human society. Experience knowledge is cultivated from direct observation of nature and human society. Theory knowledge arises from experience knowledge. Theory knowledge is composed of abstract generalizations of experience knowledge. Emotional knowledge is the earliest stage of cognitive processing. Emotional knowledge comes directly to us from our human senses. Rational knowledge arises from emotional knowledge. It is a higher stage of cognitive processing involving abstract thought and generalization of emotional knowledge. Then sentiment is the resonant manifestation of human emotions and feelings in our relationships. Sentiment is a special form of reality reflection. Specific sensations and emotions combine and dialectically develop into generalized human feelings, and we call these generalized feelings sentiment. Moral emotion is the basic manifestation of moral consciousness at an emotional level. Aesthetic emotion refers to the resonant feelings which arise from our interactions with beauty, sadness, comedy, etc., in life and in art. Religious emotion is the human belief in supernatural or spiritual forces which can't be tested or proved through material practice or observation. Willpower is the manifestation of one's own strength used to overcome obstacles in the process of achieving goals. Willpower is a dynamic aspect of consciousness, a manifestation of human consciousness and the material world. Willpower arises from human self-awareness and awareness of the purposes of our actions. Through this awareness and through willpower, we are able to struggle against ourselves and externalities to successfully achieve our goals.
Thank you.
I'm not done.
No.
I had to skip down. I just didn't have notes for there. The true value of willpower is not only manifested in strength or weakness, but is also expressed in the content and meaning of the goals that we try to achieve through our willpower. All of these factors, knowledge, sentiment, and willpower, which together create consciousness, have dialectical relationships with each other. Of these factors, knowledge is the most important. Knowledge is the most important. Knowledge is the most important because it is the mode of existence of consciousness and also the factor which guides the development of all the other factors. And it also determines how the other factors manifest. Now I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Dooley, did you want to add, or do you want to say something different?
I don't have much to add.
That's fine.
I'm just sitting here wondering what impacts this would make on like disability studies and vice versa. Like, I think that it would have a positive impact on like the study of disabilities and how the study of disabilities would impact this also.
Yeah, because disability shows up in a condition, does it not?
Yep.
And disability is either caused by a condition or born, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then like how society and the social relations and how it engages with disabled people, depending on the society that's underneath our society, it's eugenics.
Yep.
It's those. But what would it look like underneath a society that doesn't have eugenics, like a socialist society? What's it look like then? What is disability then? Because also you got to take into consideration that our system also causes disability, right?
Yeah. Like, if we lived under a system where disabled people weren't caused harm, I feel like that we would have a broader expanse on what we would consider like human. I feel like we would have better systems because of it as well.
But I think we would probably have better infrastructure when it comes to accessibility in a building or something, right? More sidewalks, more. I mean, like when you develop a world that actually engages with disabled people that are physically disabled, you have a more accessible world for non-disabled people, in a sense.
Yeah, and it sucks that within a eugenic society, the accessibility just gets turned into a luxury.
Yeah, just like I think that like land back can solve the problems of like poverty and houselessness and the climate. You know what I mean? It has a multi-function. It's not just giving land back, it's giving that and then more, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like these things we can see, you know, and everything. So does anybody else have anything want to come up or say anything else, or are we good? So I think I got a message from Two Spirit in them. I think they're going live. Okay. Well, if no one else has anything else, I appreciate everybody. Thank you for participating, Joe, and thank you for participating, Dudley. I hope everybody's gaining something from this, something new, something better, getting better. You know what I mean? Yeah, no, or thank you. So I will let everybody go, and I hope you all enjoy your night.